So my name is Petra Sultan. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Education for Thrive, the Alliance for Nonprofits for San Mateo County. And first of all, I'd really like to wish everybody a happy National Transportation Equity Day. Bet you didn't know that. Okay, there are probably some people in this room who did know it was National Transportation Equity Day, but we're very excited that this is on that day. We want to welcome you to this program, which is by Thrive, the Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County. We'd like to, normally in a regular room, we would recognize the electeds in the room. I think there are some, I'm not 100% sure, but if you did come, we'd love to recognize you. So maybe put your name in the chat and we'll kind of try to recognize you officially later. At Thrive, we empower nonprofits to thrive. We do this by uniting the voice and influence, building capacity, enabling collaboration between nonprofits, government entities, foundations, businesses, community leaders that all share a commitment to improving the life in San Mateo County. We offer a wide range of programming, as you can see from the slide. We support nonprofits across many issue areas, including arts and culture, civic participation, education, immigration, basic needs, and of course, environment and sustainability. Thrive is a membership-based organization, but everyone is welcome to our public events. If you'd like to join our mailing list or find out more about our events across all of our topic areas, or to become a member, please go to thrivealliance.org. Thrive's current areas of focus include representing nonprofits on the San Mateo County Recovery Initiative, leading outreach on COVID-19 education with nonprofit partners, and participating in the Vaccine Equity Task Force, and educating nonprofit and others on the importance of having a voice in redistricting. If you're interested in any of those topics or many more, like I said, please go to our website. I'm now going to pass it on to Doug Silverstein, our Environment and Sustainability Lead, who put this fantastic program together and has some amazing guests, and I hope you enjoy it. Doug.
Thank you, Petra. As Petra said, my name is Doug Silverstein. I lead the Thrive Environment and Sustainability Community Programs. Our mission is to identify actions to lower our ecological footprint, and we do this through monthly meetings like this one, where we discuss sustainability challenges and solutions, and we do so through a lens of equity. In these monthly meetings, usually the third Thursday of every month, we invite government, nonprofit, business, and youth leaders, and we rotate across the following topics: climate, energy, food, land, transit, waste, and water. It's good to feature this topic, transit. We haven't done this in quite a while. We also take leadership on specific sustainability challenges from time to time, like we did a year ago on single-use plastics. In this case, we brought together 30 community leaders in a cross-sector action group that we called Reduce and Rethink Single-Use Plastics in San Mateo County. And over this 5-month project, we defined the challenges and then prioritized the solutions on this massive sustainability problem. And emanating from this work is a new collective impact group called Circular SMC, a community alliance to reduce single-use plastics in San Mateo County. I also lead this effort, so please contact me anytime to learn more about Circular SMC. So at this time, I'd also like to recognize Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District and Peninsula Clean Energy. These are two strong supporters of Thrive ENS community programs and believers in our mission. So thank you, MidPen and PCE, for helping to make these meetings possible. So quickly, our next two meetings focus on water, another topic we haven't covered in a long time. Even if you're not a sustainable water enthusiast, we invite you to join, as there's always overlap across these topics that we cover. They are not in isolation, the topics: climate, energy, food, land, transit, waste, and water. And our speakers are local experts that you'll likely benefit from knowing. They're great leaders in government, nonprofit, business, and youth. So you can register now for the February 25th event at thrivealliance.com. So welcome to this panel, where we'll discuss what lies ahead for sustainable and equitable transit on the Peninsula corridor. I'm so excited to have these 5 speakers, and it's likely an overpacked agenda, so I apologize in advance for the vast amount of information that you'll get today, but there's so much to learn from these 5. So our format is that each speaker gets, I said, 5 to 7 minutes. It's hard to keep it to that, of course. And then we'll open it up to the audience for question and answers. And our focus for this panel is, as the pandemic shifts subside, how do we leap forward to a new era of accessible and low carbon commute and leisure travel? And the key assumption of Thrive's work is that we're more powerful when we work together. So we encourage you to note a couple names of people that you see, you hear or see in the audience, and reach out to them and engage in the next couple weeks. That's how we believe we address these challenges more holistically. So on to our panel. So our first panelist is Emma Shlaes, is the Deputy Director of Silicon Valley Bike Coalition. Emma works on regional policy issues, including Caltrain and bike parking and access, amongst other things. She has a degree in natural resource and sustainable development, and she spent a summer researching the auto rickshaw industry in Mumbai, India, which I didn't know. Emma will talk about citizen needs and biking preferences, city and county bike plans, and slow streets. So Emma, take it away, and I'll forward the slides as appropriate.
Great, thank you, Doug. My name is Emma Shlaes. As Doug said, you can go ahead to the next slide. So biking is in many ways a miracle transportation mode. It's affordable, good for the environment, it gets you exercise and many more benefits. Our region is also just made for biking. The weather is perfect and we have a lot of flat areas, though also some hills. Next slide. Yeah, only small percentages of our population bike. So why is that? Last year, SUBC did a poll, actually a statistically significant poll with Change Research and Minnesota Transportation Institute. And we wanted to find out attitudes about why people chose the transportation modes that they do. So we found that in terms of biking, no surprise here, but no one really enjoys biking next to 45-mile-per-hour traffic. But many don't enjoy biking next to 25-mile-per-hour traffic. But people do feel more comfortable biking on trails or off-street paths, as it's called here, as well as protected and separated bikeways. So for the most part, our streets, if you notice, aren't really set up so that people feel safe and comfortable biking on the type of facilities we have now. But we can change that. Next slide. We also found that speed, so how fast it takes to get somewhere, is the #1 factor in how people choose to get around, followed by ease of use and safety from crime and crashes. So we have to make things easier, faster, and safer to get more people biking. And I'll just note that there's a link here. Actually, I have it. I'll send in the chat as well. We have many more graphs and stats from this polling. There's a big report if you want to check that out later on. Next slide. So we have the opportunity now during this very unique time to experiment and make changes to make things a little easier, and also just experiment and try things different to change how people behave in the future. This is a survey from our website last spring, and we found that people are driving less and biking and walking more. And part of that, part of the reason people are biking and walking more is because they're driving less. So not only are, people don't need to go to as many places, but there's less people on the roads driving. So people feel a little more comfortable doing the other activities on the street. So people also just like slowing down a little bit, and maybe you're one of those people, getting exercise, fresh air. We've seen bike sales explode, places are sold out. A lot of people are learning to bike for the first time. So how do we continue to capture that and keep people biking into the future as people go back to the office and school? Next slide. Next, please. Okay. Might not be working, but I'll go on while Doug figures that out. So slow streets is one of those solutions or one option that we can consider. You may have heard of this last year in the spring. Cities around the region implemented slow streets. So this is when streets are closed to through traffic, but people can walk and bike. Local traffic, if you live there, you're free to drive there. Emergency vehicles and deliveries are all allowed. But SVBC would like to continue these programs and expand them to more cities, more streets, and just continue to do that experimentation. No one really knew last spring that we would still be here almost a year later, but people still need that additional space to recreate and get around. And we know that there won't just be like suddenly one day we all go back to our normal lives. If anything, there'll be a slow transition back to a different new normal. There's going to be still remote work, there's going to be hybrid schedules. So might as well take this opportunity to continue to experiment. Next slide. Okay, the next thing I'll talk about as Doug figures out the presentation is your city's bike plan. So this is a little wonky, but it's really important for how cities plan and fund bike projects. So on the slide, you'll see some of the cities that have recently updated their bike plans. There's been many over the past year or two, and there's also some currently in process now. But basically, a city will spend a year or two doing public outreach, doing collision analysis, analyzing other factors, and coming up with a blueprint for specific streets and specific types of projects, whether trails, protected bike lanes, regular bike lanes, and that will be their plan. And then they'll go out and get grant funding to be able to implement these projects. So if you don't already know what's in your city's bike plan, go to the city's website, check it out. And also just pay attention as some cities like Redwood City coming up, South San Francisco is working on their bike plan. There will be public meetings happening and online surveys and places for you to provide input, like where you would want to see a protected bikeway, for instance. And I'll just note that the unincorporated San Mateo County bike plan, that's focused on unincorporated areas, that's going to the Board of Supervisors for approval next week. And the countywide bike plan with CCAG is also in process right now. So look out for that. Looks at connecting cities and regional connections like countywide. Next slide. E-bikes is another option to just get people biking more, but also it's faster, it's easier. You can go farther. You may not be as sweaty when you arrive. And we're working with Peninsula Clean Energy. I won't steal Carlos' thunder, but we are helping with them with their rebate program for e-bikes this year, and we'll be doing outreach around that. But e-bikes are great. They have cargo bikes where you can carry, your groceries or whatever, and also kid bikes, so you have, all your kids, but it's easier because you have a battery going, and it's a great solution. Next slide. Finally, if you want to learn more about any of these things, we have a bunch of public events coming up. They'll be monthly. So we have monthly workshops, just how to ride a bike in different scenarios. And we also are doing a lot of advocacy trainings and forums. So if you want to learn, both connect with your neighbors in your city, and then also learn how to get more projects, more bike projects happening in your area, then check out these events. And I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Emma. Sorry about that. Not sure exactly what happened, but thank you, Emma. Our next speaker is Adina Levin, the Executive Director of Friends of Caltrain. Adina is also co-leading Seamless Bay Area's policy and advocacy initiatives. She contributes to a variety of local and regional advisory bodies on transportation and connections between transit and land use. So Adina will be talking about Caltrain Electrification, Measure RR, transit equity, and inter-county alliances. Adina, take it away. Adina, are you on mute or are you? You're on mute. There you go. She's still on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so I will get started, and I'll talk about electric Caltrain and how that's relating to an environmentally and socially sustainable transit network. And Doug, some of these slides are going to go by real quick, so we'll be flipping through some of them. So as Emma was saying, during COVID, people have been spending a lot more time out walking and bicycling. But at the same time, there's been a real decline in the use of public transportation as many people, particularly with white collar jobs, have been working from home. And but in order to achieve our environmental goals, public transportation is a huge piece of the mix. We'll talk about recovery from COVID and how that relates to several dimensions of sustainability. Please, next slide. So Caltrain is really ancient. It started out with coal doing steam trains back in 1863. Next slide. Through an era of diesel, which is still into the present, and very excitingly, next slide, Caltrain is becoming electric. The mantra for a lot of our environmental climate goals is electrify everything, and Caltrain is going electric, but that's important not just because of getting rid of the pollution from the diesel trains, next slide, but because in many ways that allows many, many more people to use public transportation. So what an electric train can do is it accelerates faster. You can hit more stations in the same amount of time. And that allows greater capacity. It allows it to carry more people. So before COVID, for a few years, Caltrain worked on a business plan showing that there's a pent-up demand in our area to be able to have 3 to 4 times as many people using the train. And that electrification would enable more frequent all-day service. So where Caltrain has historically been used for commuting to work, you would be able to use it to go to dinner and come home. A schedule that is easier to connect to so you can go to more places. Next slide. And that would really take very large numbers of cars off the road, 5.5 lanes of freeway that we don't need to expand, saving 115 metric tons of greenhouse gases per day, really essential in being able to address our greenhouse gas goals, including supporting transit-oriented development where people can live lifestyles where they don't need to drive for their daily lives. Next slide. Unfortunately, that vision was giving a huge whack by COVID, and with COVID, Caltrain's ridership went down by about 95%, and there was a real risk that with those riders gone, Caltrain might have needed to shut down. Next slide. Fortunately, well before COVID, that business plan was based on thinking about if there was some funding to be able to do improvements, what would that funding do? There was a bill that was passed in 2017 that was going to provide stable funding for Caltrain that was already in the works, and that could be, and that went on the ballot in 2020 as a measure to rescue Caltrain and save it from being shut down and save our environmental goals and allow our economy to come back. And Friends of Caltrain worked with Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition and many other nonprofit and community groups. We brought in collectively the volunteer base, over 500 volunteers doing text messaging, doing phone banking, sending messages to our friends and family, which provides the margin of victory in a ballot measure. Move on. So, I mean, one of the challenges that Caltrain had was it was coming out of the commuter rail tradition of taking white collar commuters to jobs in the city, and that aspect was a real weakness in COVID when white collar workers stayed home. And just like a lot of COVID showed some of the weaknesses in our society, this was one of them where the ridership crashed. But as part of this business planning, next slide, Friends of Caltrain had been working for years, and Caltrain picked up the torch in highlighting how that Caltrain's revenue being dependent on fares and high fares, it was necessary to balance the budget, but it was a weakness. Move on. Next slide. Where there were plenty of people who would use Caltrain if they had the ability to use it, but that expensive fare structure kept people. So this is Omar Chavez. He works at Zorene's restaurant in Palo Alto. We worked with Palo Alto Transportation Management Association that set up a pilot to provide free transit so that low-income workers like Omar and his colleagues could use Caltrain. Move on and skip a couple of slides here. So during COVID, it's been essential workers using Caltrain. Caltrain's own studies had shown that low-income people, that Caltrain's rider income didn't match the people through the corridor, and there's things that Caltrain can do, whether it be with fares, whether it be with the hours of service and local transit connections, to enable a greater diversity of people to use the service, which is going to be a sustainability benefit, environmental sustainability and social sustainability going forward. These were policies that are going to be funded by Measure RR. Move ahead. Move ahead. One of the things that showed is that connectivity is an equity issue where lower income riders are more likely to access rail via other transit. Next slide. And unfortunately, in order to be able to achieve this, we have some organizational issues in the Bay Area with 27 different transit agencies that have challenges in working together. So in the interest of that, a few years ago, I co-founded Seamless Bay Area, which is working, and there's some major milestones coming up soon to help our organization, our region's public transportation system develop that greater connectivity, which will help people of all income levels make transit much more convenient. Move on. Next slide. And we're also working with a coalition called Voices for Public Transportation, which is about bringing funding into the public transportation system in a way that is more equitable and sustainable. And so we've been working both on the emergency and COVID recovery, as well as long-term public transportation funding in order to make a public transportation be useful for many people. It needs to be affordable, it needs to be frequent, it needs to be convenient. So when after this presentation, you'll get the contact information for how your organization and you as an individual can get involved in these initiatives to make Caltrain and public transit be more equitable and more connected and stably funded going forward. Thank you.
Doug, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Adina. Yeah, I just want to say I worked with Emma and Adina closely a couple of years ago on a ballot measure, and we're just so lucky to have great leaders in our community who care deeply about sustainability and who are good at what they do, and includes the following speakers as well. So our next speaker is John Ford, the Executive Director of commute.org. John has a unique blend of experience in software technology, transportation, and government relations. And as the leader of commute.org, he leads the mission to reduce the number of drive-alone vehicles traveling to, from, or through San Mateo County. And he does so with a focus on local business employees, employer programs, and city partnerships. And he'll be talking about commuter shuttles, ride shares, and last minute transit. Thank you, John. Take it away.
Thank you, Doug, and everyone at Thrive Alliance for the invitation and bringing together such a great group for today's discussion. I see a lot of familiar faces, peers and colleagues and partners out in the audience. So thanks for taking the time this afternoon to join the conversation. For those of you that don't know us, commute.org is a government agency. We're a JPA formed with 17 cities plus the county in San Mateo. But we operate a little bit more like a nonprofit. We're grant funded. We work closely with a broad coalition of partners, and we have more board members than staff, which is the true sign of a nonprofit. As you can see on this slide, our mission is to reduce single occupancy vehicle and VMT trips through San Mateo County, and TDM is the mechanism by which we do that. So I'll be talking about that a little bit. Next slide, please. In San Mateo County, which is where we operate, all trips and all single occupant vehicle trips are a problem, but we really focus only on those that are the commute trips. It's about 420,000 employees in San Mateo County, and that's really what we focus on. But about half of those employees come to our county from other counties, surrounding counties. So it's a regional issue, and our TDM efforts are done with our partners, not only in the county, but throughout the region. Next slide. San Mateo County is really diverse. It's easy sometimes to think of our county as just being a tech county or a biotech county, but it really is comprised of a lot of different industries. It's a very diverse group. And with that diversity comes a lot of diversity in the workforce, the days they work, the hours, the shifts, the commute options that are available to them, and perhaps most importantly, the level of their employees' engagement in what that commute looks like and whether or not it needs to be sustainable. And the pandemic has really brought those differences into focus for those of us that work on TDM issues in the county. Next slide, please. I'm going to use my opening comments to make the obvious case that the diverse workforce in San Mateo County that we were just talking about requires an equally diverse set of options if we're going to drive down the VMT and single occupancy vehicle rates. I'm also going to argue that those options should be shared, connected, and electric powered whenever possible and wherever appropriate. It's important to recognize that all the options depicted on this slide need our support in order to succeed. And I'm going to touch on each of those briefly as I go through my comments. Next slide, please. Commute.org operates 24 different shuttle routes, or if we want to be really cool, we call them micro transit routes. They're shuttles. They're about 40% funded through private sector contributions. It's a public-private partnership in its true form. Pre-pandemic, we did about 600,000 passenger trips a year. We've continued operating the shuttles during COVID, but our ridership, similar to the way that Adina talked about Caltrain, our ridership is down 85% on those routes. We've suspended routes, we've reduced routes, we've consolidated, but most importantly, we've continued operating, and the essential workers and the frontline workers that have been able to take advantage of our operations because they're transit dependent have really benefited from that. And we really need to thank our partners, not only the TA, but our private sector partners that have contributed or continue to contribute to the program to allow us to operate during these times. Next slide, please. This graphic just is a quick show of where throughout the county that the commute.org branded shuttles operate. All of our shuttles touch either Caltrain, BART, or the San Francisco Bay Ferry in South City. Some routes are multiple. They're both first mile and last mile, meaning that it's important for us to capture people in their residential area to be able to take them to a station, just as it's important to take them from a station if they're coming from out of the county to their ultimate workplace within San Mateo County. Next slide, please. Touch on quite a few topics on this one here, but basically as following on Adina's comments on the Caltrain electrification and the importance of that, the backbone of the transit system in San Mateo County is Caltrain. We recognize that, we understand it. We think Caltrain electrification is going to be a real game changer. but so too will the transit-oriented development that's happening in and around the stations. It's great that TOD is happening, bringing people closer to the stations, but it's also important to recognize that we're losing a lot of parking in and around the Caltrain stations and BART stations throughout the county. That means that that first mile connection is going to become incredibly important, and even more so as we go forward. The next graphic shows, or the next item on there shows the, oh, I'm sorry, Doug, the Express Lanes project. And this is in San Mateo County, and it's going to ultimately result in 22 miles of HOV priority lanes going from Highway 380 in the north, connecting to Santa Clara County on the south along 101. It is going to make HOV travel more enticing. It's going to allow for carpools and van pools, other high occupancy vehicle travel and express buses to take advantage of those lanes, hopefully move through traffic much faster, and allow point-to-point travel in an HOV mode, supported really through technology and everything that's going to be around it. The Samtrans Reimagine project, if you're not involved with it, please get involved with it. They need as much input and support as we can provide to them. Their ultimate goal is to provide more efficiency and more effectiveness and more equity along the bus lines throughout San Mateo County. As Adina also showed in that, it's that connectivity that's going to be incredibly important to provide those diverse options that we need to. And the last part of this slide talks about infrastructure, and that is the active modes that we're looking to incorporate into those options for our workforce, whether it's walking or biking, the e-bike modes, whatever we can do to drive up the active modes in our community is the better. Taking advantage of that shift to the bike commuting or to the bicycle riding that's happening now, and hopefully converting those people into bike commuters going forward. Next slide. The question we're asked most frequently, and for which we really don't yet have a definitive answer, is what happens with remote work as a commute alternative in the post-pandemic Bay Area, right? What's it going to look like? Pre-COVID, there were about 6% of the Bay Area workforce was using telework as a primary mode. And that was actually the fastest growing segment of the commute mode options from a percentage perspective. But with this slide, and I borrowed this data from the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, happy to share it with anybody who's interested in it. Just reach out to me afterwards. But what this was looking at was kind of the fallacy that everybody's teleworking. Everybody would be eligible for remote work. And we know that's just not the case. Their study across the Bay Area looked at it and said about 55% of the overall workforce is not remote work eligible based on the type of work that they do. Now, I think this is maybe a little bit overstated. They did it by industry class or job class, and I think that they may have underestimated it a little bit, but it's still pretty close. Let's call it a 50-50 split. But what's more important, if you look at some of the data in there, if you can zoom in on it, what will happen is that there are a lot of race and ethnic disparities, as well as income level disparities on this. So while remote work is important, it's important to take into consideration that it's not something that's going to be available for everyone going forward. Next slide. San Mateo County, out of that 420,000 approximate jobs, if you use this research, it shows that about 47% of our workforce is eligible to continue doing remote work or to do remote work as a primary mode. Don't get me wrong. Any commute where your car doesn't have to leave the driveway is a fabulous commute from a sustainability perspective. We want to support it. We want to encourage long-term remote work arrangements. We want to facilitate that. Our team at commute.org is doing a lot of work in that area right now. But it's also important to understand that there's going to be consequences and disparities that need to be considered on a long-term basis to lock in some of those gains that we have. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the MTC Plan Bay Area 2050 goals and how they came out initially and thought mandating a 60% work from home mandate on employers with 25 or more might be a quick and easy way to get to this to the greenhouse gas emission results that they need. That was pushed. There was a lot of pushback on that, and I think rightly so. The impact on that on public transit and on the kind of the equity disparities that happen as a result of that were too great, and they've now dialed that back a little bit. And now we're looking at that 60% goal as being a mix of those alternatives that we're talking about from a traffic standpoint or from a commuting standpoint. Next slide. I guess what I really want to make sure that everybody understands is that mode choice matters. That's why we exist. It's what we are here to do. It's to make sure that everyone understands that we're all in this together, making those mode choices, making them available for our employees, for the communities in which we work, is incredibly important. Giving people options other than driving alone and making them equitable and affordable is really what is going to allow us to make the changes that are necessary. Next slide. So I want to kind of close by saying that if you or your organization are working on any of the issues that I just touched on and we're not yet partners, please reach out to us. We would like to work with you. We would like to see your help in helping us achieve what our goal is reducing that. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to taking some questions from you soon.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is Rebecca Fisher, the Climate Smart Transportation Lead at Bay Area Air Quality Management District. Rebecca studied environmental economics and policy, which I appreciate. Spent 4 years at the U.S. Department of Treasury, or the U.S. Department of Treasury, is that our Treasury? Yeah, Treasury, thank you. And has additional expertise in sustainable cities, environmental justice, and international development. Rebecca will be discussing electric vehicle growth and overcoming the challenges to drive increased penetration rates of electric vehicles. So Rebecca, take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug, and good afternoon, everyone. We can go to the next slide. So I work for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. It's a really long name. Some people shorten it as BAAQMD, but I'm just going to go with the Air District for now. What we do is we essentially regulate air pollution within the 9 Bay Area counties that surround San Francisco Bay. And we were established back in 1955. Our main priority is to reduce air emissions, and our authority is only over stationary sources of pollution. So that's refineries, industrial sources of pollution. But as many of you know, the major source of air pollution here in the Bay Area, and frankly, most of the United States, is transportation. That's mobile sources of pollution. And we have no way of directly regulating mobile sources of pollution. That's the state's job. So one way that we interact with this issue is through provision of grants. And that's why the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, or Air District, is interested in EVs. So next slide, please. So one of the things I did want to mention too, and echo from everyone's presentation so far, is that first and foremost, we would love for people to just not drive, to bike or walk or take public transit. But in the event that you're one of those, let's say 50% of workers, or you need to get around town, we want people to drive an EV. And when I say EVs, I mean 3 different types of vehicles. The first is a plug-in hybrid that has a gas engine, but also an electric engine and plugs into a wall, a battery electric vehicle, which is just an electric engine, and a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, which runs on hydrogen gas, and the only emission from that is water vapor. So that's what I mean when I say electric vehicle or EV. And what I want us to focus on this slide is the electric vehicle trends and goals for the Bay Area. And I want to focus first on the vehicle. So I'm going to go to the right-hand side of the slide. So back in 2019, about 3.4% of all of the cars registered in the Bay Area were electric vehicles. The teeny tiny sliver. And our goal for 2050 is to have that up to 90%. And that's a goal that's shared by the state as well. So we have a long way to go. I'd like you to look down now at the bottom right-hand side and see kind of our progress to date. So back in 2013, we had around 15,000 EVs here in the Bay Area. Again, 2019, that's up to like almost 200,000. By 2025, we're projected to have around 247. I think that might be more, but then by 2050, we're hoping to have 5 million EVs. Now, one of the major barriers to EV adoption is charging infrastructure, particularly for a lot of people who don't live in a single family home, who live in an apartment building, who might not have a parking space where they can charge a vehicle. So I want to focus in on public charging for those folks. So there are around 9,500 public charging ports here in the Bay Area. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory says we need 25,000 right now. That's not a future. We should have built 25,000 public charging ports to support the number of EVs we currently have in the Bay Area. Again, we're a bit behind, but don't get discouraged. Next slide, let's move on. I want to drill now into the regional distribution of those electric vehicles here in the Bay Area. You can see the South Bay, you guys are doing really, really well. There are a ton of EVs registered to residents down in the South Bay, and they're sprinkled throughout the rest of the Bay Area. But you'll notice there are some areas, particularly in the East Bay and in parts of San Francisco, that have very high population numbers, but low EV counts. That, I believe, is where the equity component of all of this discussion will come into play, but let's move to the next slide so I can get to that in a bit. I want to focus again on public charging. Dispersion of public charging across the Bay Area generally follows population centers, generally follows the major highway corridors here in the Bay Area. But again, these are just public chargers. So let's say you live in an apartment all the way down at the bottom of Santa Clara County. There's no public charging for you that's close by, or up in parts of the Contra Costa County or Alameda County. So anyway, there are gaps that exist that we want to work to fill. Next slide. All right, so this is why we're here today, to talk about the intersection of electric vehicles and equity. And why is this so important? It's because we have several underserved communities here in the Bay Area. And what I mean by underserved communities is that they have they're closer to air pollution sources. Refineries, as I mentioned before, transportation corridors, you name it, recycling facilities. They have historically been left out of decision-making for various reasons, but they've not been traditionally included in decision-making on the siting of those pollution sources, or even where public dollars flow to. And then thirdly, they have experienced economic disenfranchisement, either through redlining or various other kind of public policies that were misguided. So this is what I mean by underserved communities. Let's move to this next slide. And one of the main ways that we want to increase equity, weave equity throughout the EV market, is by, there are many ways to do this, but my top three I've put on this slide, and I want to talk through those with you guys today, which is, the first is to weave equity throughout all grant and incentive programs. So many of you may know there are state incentive programs, there's a federal tax rebate, there are local government programs to give money for EVs. The Air District offers money for electric vehicles. PCE offers money for EVs. One of the things that we did early on in the EV market revolution was just open the floodgates, and anyone who wants to buy an EV, here's a couple $1,000s for you. That meant that the early adopters, who are traditionally higher income, early movers, those folks got the advantage of the public dollars to help them purchase their first EV. What we'd like to do now is focus the majority of public incentives on folks who are not early adopters, who are moderate to low income, and ideally people of color as well. So the important thing is to ensure that the way these incentives are designed, that they're targeted to income qualified residents. Secondly, I think a lot of grant programs, a lot of government agencies can work more closely with trusted community partners to better understand the unique needs, but also the unique barriers for certain communities. A barrier could be that in a community, there's predominantly multi-family housing, and there's no EV chargers, and there's no public EV chargers. So again, the barrier would be, let's install an EV charger. Another key component of this is the trusted community partners part, which is that if I'm from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, I come into a community, they don't know who I am, they don't trust me. I'm from the government, which sometimes is not greeted with open arms. The key is working with folks who are already trusted within the community, whether that's a religious organization or social service organization, and making sure that you work with them, empower them to share knowledge about your grant programs, about the policies that are being rolled out around electric vehicles with the residents in their community. And then finally, this is huge: streamline, simplify, and incentivize EV charging. I've mentioned EV charging a lot throughout this. I think this is one of the major barriers to widespread electric vehicle adoption. You see a gas station on almost every corner. You almost never see electric vehicle charging stations unless you're looking for them. And that's key because the majority of people who drive EVs are currently charging at home. And the subset of residents who don't have homes are left out of this EV revolution. And so one of the big things that I want to leave you with all today is that as we recover from COVID, as we move into our kind of build back greener policy setting and budget allocations, we really need to maintain the priority that equity is our #1 goal, ensuring that EVs are accessible to all community members, but that we're making sure that we're giving even more, particularly around the technical assistance side of buying an EV to folks who have not even thought about an EV as part of their car buying kind of thought process. So one of the things I do want to also leave you with, next slide, which is my last slide, and it just says thank you. But I do want to direct you all to 2 grant programs that the Air District offers for EV chargers and electric vehicles. The EV charging grants is the CHARGE program, which is now open and accepting applications through middle of March. And then the Clean Cars for All program is for individual residents that want to scrap their old gas guzzling vehicle and replace it with an electric vehicle. And we recently started offering e-bikes. So you can get $9,500 for an EV or $7,500 for an e-bike. We've had 3 people buy e-bikes and 1,600 people buy EVs. So let's try and get that ratio up. So the more you share this with folks, the more that you share the information, the more people will get into e-bikes. So that's it for me. I'm really looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Rebecca. I've yet to buy my e-bike, but I've had an EV for a long time and I love it. And thank you to the Air District for the grants that you give to our community. We are very appreciative. Our next speaker's organization also is a great supporter of our community with grants and programs. So our last speaker is Carlos Moreno, the Community Outreach Specialist at Peninsula Clean Energy, as I said, one of the sponsors of our programs. Carlos builds strategic relationships with community organizations like Thrive and many others in this forum here, including Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. And if you don't know Carlos yet, I would make a point to introduce yourself. He is a connector to all of us in the community. So Carlos, why don't you take it away and finish up our panelists, and we'll get to Q&A afterwards. But I should also say, but hang on, before you go, I want to say to all the participants, attendees, type your questions, start typing your questions in the chat box. And after Carlos goes, we'll take some of the questions from the chat box. So thank you. Sorry about that, Carlos. Go ahead. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Doug. You're going to make me blush. Yeah, thanks for organizing this, and thank you all for your time. First of all, I want to say I was inspired to hear how all the other panelists are leading to address this critical issue of our time. So today I'm going to talk about 2 main things. One is talk about our core business of who we are and sort of what we do. And second, talk about additional programs that we're offering to further help residents and companies electrify. So next slide. So we were launched in 2016. We're a relatively new agency, and our guiding light is really our mission, which I'm going to read verbatim so you know. It's to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by expanding access to sustainable and affordable energy. So we were authorized unanimously by the city council members in each city in San Mateo County. Next slide. Great. So the way our core business works is, one, we generate the electricity. So we sign the contracts, create the electricity. PG&E, they own the wires, deliver the electricity. And for residents, everyone was automatically enrolled into Peninsula Clean Energy. So for them, they're saving a little bit of money as well as helping the environment. But basically up until 2016, so before we existed, PG&E just did all of it. Now they only deliver the electricity, and at the local level, at the county level, we decide what the sources of energy are. So Next slide. So now people actually have choices to where their energy comes from. All the residents, so we have about 97% of the residents still enrolled in Eco Plus. So that is 50% renewable energy, 95% of it is carbon free, and the rates are lower than PG&E. So people have a choice now. If they want to go 100%, they can sign up. It's 100% renewable energy, and it's only about $4 more per month. Or they can choose to go back to PG&E. Next slide. So the impact of having Peninsula Clean Energy in the 4 years is $18 million combined annual saving for our customers. And in terms of emissions saved, it's 144,000 carbon emissions saved, which is equivalent to removing 30,000 cars from the road for 1 year. Next slide. Great. Okay, so that is a quick snapshot of who we are. So we're a not-for-profit public agency. So we reinvest our earnings into programs that go beyond just, we can control how much green electricity the county gets when you flip a switch. But how can we go further, help people, switch from gas cars or go to all electric homes? That's what we reinvest those earnings into. And that comes down to three main areas. One I'm going to talk about mainly today is transportation. But I'm going to quickly touch on some of our resilience stuff and all electric buildings, so you can see the breadth of what our programs team is working on. Next slide. So we have EV incentives that go on top of all the other EV incentives Rebecca had mentioned. But right now, our first one is we'll let you rent an EV for free. So you can use Turo or whatever rental car place you want to, but you can rent an EV and we'll give you up to $200 for any EV that you want. And we also have another rebate that's for used EVs, and that is for income qualifying residents. So that basically is for one person, for example, you'd have to have a maximum income of $51,000, and it scales up. So for a family of four, it would be $104,000. But that $4,000 that we give for used EVs, you can stack on top of that other used EV program and discounts. Next slide. Okay, so as Emma had mentioned at the top, we have an e-bike program that I'm really excited about. But first of all, it's income qualifying as well. So those same figures that we talked about on the last slide, so 51,000, same as this program. And that's because, and Rebecca mentioned this succinctly and eloquently of, we want to address where intersection of equity and transportation. And just going back to our mission, which is, expanding access to sustainable energy solutions, it's really where we want to go. So that's why our program around e-bikes is income qualifying, and the discount is up to 80% purchase of the total of the bike, or $800, whichever is less. So there's a couple ways people can purchase their e-bike. One is we're working with specific local bike shops throughout the county. And there, if a participant is interested, and since we're working directly with them, it's not a rebate. We would basically just right off the top take off 80% or $800, and they can finance the rest however they want with those bike shops at the lower price. People also have the option of purchasing online if they want to, but in that case, it would be a rebate. So they would have to put up the cost up front and then get the rebate afterwards. And this program is estimated to launch in the spring, but we're working really closely with the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition on this. And as Emma mentioned, we're also going to have workshops. Hopefully at some point when things go back to normal, at some point we'll have some classes in person, because this program is going to last for several years. Next slide. Great. And yeah, so that's all that we have around transportation, but I'm just going to touch on one more thing, and that's We have a discount on heat pump water heaters. I feel like whenever I do a presentation to a green audience, that's one of the top questions I'll get is, are there any discount on heat pump water heaters? And we do have a discount. It's a $2,500 for heat pump water heaters. And we have additional discounts for residents who are on the CARE or FARA discount rate, or if you're trying to upgrade to an electric panel. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And yeah, look forward to hearing your questions. On mute again.
Thank you, Carlos. Yes. Thank you. And thanks to all the speakers. It's really wonderful to hear from our experts. And there's a lot of experts also who are in attendance. So I want to hear from you as well. I'm going to throw out one question at the beginning. I'll start with for Adina, but as we go through, I think Petra's going to help me and maybe just jump in and ask some questions. And I'll see we try and manage the chat box as well. But this one is from Jessica Alba at Stanford Transportation. If you could implement one or two, so we talked about what you're doing now. So this is a little bit forward looking. If you could implement one or two initiatives that advance transportation equity in the Bay Area over the next 18 months, what would you do? So Adina, and then others, if other speakers want to think about after Adina.
Okay. Yeah, so one thing that's really exciting is the region is doing a fare integration study about what can be done to have more integrated and equitable fares. One of the things that Caltrain equity study showed is that low-income people need local transit to be able to get to the regional transit. And that's also something that was shown in Samtrans's research for its reimagined Samtrans project to overhaul its routes, that Samtrans riders, who are largely low-income people of color, want to be able to have access to the regional services. And so right now, there's a fare discount program for households with up to $50,000 for a family of 4 that will give a discount. But that discount is per agency. So if you're taking Samtrans to Caltrain or Samtrans to BART, you still need to pay twice. If we had a fare system where you could have a fare cap, so you'll pay a maximum of maybe $150 a month, and then if you're low income, maybe it goes down to 75. But you can use any public transit around the Bay Area. That would create a lot more freedom and a lot more affordability. So that was a long answer, but I think that would be one of the powerful strategies that we could do.
Okay, great. Anyone else, any other panelists want to jump in on that?
This is John. Yes, the integrated fare study is an incredibly important study. It got started in 2004, and we're now 17 years later, and we don't have integrated fares yet. So don't hold your breath, but it is something that's very important. It's being talked about, I think now with more importance than it ever has been.
All right, there's a really big milestone on this the week after next, and in the material that is going out in the signups I'll have, that will have information for what you can do to participate.
Thanks.
So I wanted to let everyone know that we will be sending out all of these resources. You don't have to be like furiously scribbling this down. We will make sure that there's plenty of follow-up and plenty of opportunity for you to get involved and get connected with all of these fantastic resources and people. So can I go ahead with, we have a question
Please.
from Council Member Gina Pepin. She says, as I understand it, gas station franchisors do not allow for the installation of EV charging stations. Is anyone encouraging legislation that would help the oil companies lessen the restrictions on gas station owners?
I can try and tackle that one. So I am not aware of any legislation or any rules prohibiting installing EV chargers at gas stations. I know of several that have installed EV chargers at their sites, whether they're franchisees or the business relationship between the large oil companies and the gas station. that may be the difference perhaps in whatever rule that you're referencing. But I know EVgo has installed several fast chargers at gas stations across the United States, but also here in California and the Bay Area, I believe, and a few other EV charging companies have done so as well. I think ChargePoint might have, but I know for sure EVgo has. And there's no legislation that I'm aware of that is encouraging it. We do know that it's one of the hardest construction projects to undertake when you're an EV charging installer, because there's so much underground already at a gas station, and EV chargers require tunneling under the ground to create the connection for the EV charger to the panel for the electricity, that it's quite tricky. And the only way that it usually economically makes sense is if you're relying on that EV charger to bump up traffic to the like AM PM shop or something. It's not necessarily just the you're not going to be making money off of the electricity from the charger. I hope that's helpful. Not a full answer, but information.
I think that she has a follow-up question, which is that how many of the chargers are fast chargers? We know Tesla has their fast chargers, but for the EVgo and stuff, how many of those are superchargers, and how long does it take to charge a car?
Yeah, Carlos might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think EVgo only does fast chargers as well. ChargePoint, SEMA Connect, FreeWire. There are so many different EV charging OEMs, original manufacturing, original equipment manufacturers and most of them offer both level 2 and DC fast, which is the super fast ones that are comparable to the Tesla superchargers. So I would say the majority of public charging stations in the Bay Area are probably DC fast. No, they're not. I think they're still level 2. You'll see on my slide, most of them are level 2, but a majority of the ones that are not connected to a workplace are DC fast. So there's a lot at like grocery stores, or I know Target has level 2, which is the slower one, which will take 4 hours to fully charge your car, but the DC fast will be like 30 to, it can sometimes get to 45 minutes depending on if they're clamping down on the speeds of the charge, if there's a lot of cars charging at once.
I'm going to do one more for you before we move back to, there are a bunch of questions about bicycles, but are there efforts in San Mateo County to site public EV chargers at places like public school parking lots?
Yes. So there are efforts. I believe there have been installations in San Mateo County already. We have the charge program that I linked in the chat earlier will accept applications from schools if they want to install EV chargers. And I know that the electric school bus industry is really taking off. So there are a few schools that are interested in doing that, installing chargers for medium and heavy duty vehicles rather than just light duty passenger vehicles for teachers and students. But yes, there are efforts underway. There are several installations, several that connect solar power and the chargers, which is super cool. And we would love to fund more.
Thanks. The next question, we're going to skip back to bicycles. There seem to be a bunch of questions about more protected lanes and making sure you have both north-south and east-west. Emma, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I tried to answer some of that in the chat, and I'm hunting down some links as well. But so there's a couple of existing examples. So there's the Peninsula Bikeway, which was 2 or 3 years ago between the cities of Redwood City, Menlo Park, Palo Alto, and Mountain View, and they came together and identified a low stress bike route that is signed, and it's mostly residential. But they also had the goals to identify another route in the future. They were looking at El Camino, Middlefield, and other routes, which is still in the process. And then Caltrain's District 4, which is our area, they are doing a bike superhighway study. That's the link that I just added there. So that will be bike superhighways, like they don't really exist yet, but both Caltrans and BTA are planning for them. And those will be, they could take different forms, but the point is to get people biking in, their own space and have faster connections places. So they're taking input right now, and that's a really great opportunity. And then also the CCAG countywide plan would be another good place to put your feedback for where you want to see those routes.
And there was a question about where to put your feedback if there are problems with the bike lane, if they need to be upgraded.
Yes. So I'll also post a link on our website. We have somewhere it says like report a hazard. And so we have links for all the cities of how you would do that. But if you're in your city, you can usually just find it on the city's website. There's sometimes it's a 311 number. Sometimes there's an online portal where you can track your request. But all cities have that. So I'll link to that as well.
Great. And I don't know who this is going to be for, but whoever wants to jump in, what's going on with working with ride hailing companies to get those drivers into EVs?
Yeah, so
Carlos. Right?
Yeah, so we actually have a pilot program where we're working with Lyft to help them electrify, but I need to look through Kristen. I see Kristen's on the call. Do you have any details on that program, or else I can just look through it and get back to you in a sec?
Sure, it's a pilot program. I think it involves helping the drivers get a slightly higher rate if they're driving electric, and help them get into electric cars. But again, I don't have a whole lot of details on that right now.
Yeah, but we are working with them and trying to incentivize them to go electric.
And Carlos or Kirsten, do you have something to add about the charging at schools?
Hey, that's a conversation we started with the schools. Construction at schools is those conversations take a while. So I'd say that's a conversation we started a while, and it's moving.
Petra, I want to jump in. I took some classes at Skyline College and Kenyatta College, and the charging systems are really good, and they're free for students. It's really game changing to use pricing, I think, to drive markets. So one thing is there's a number of students from Woodside High School and other high schools. I want to encourage you students to raise your hands and jump in and ask questions if you'd like. Also want to just jump in on our question to John. Our streets, we hear from Emma, our streets aren't necessarily set up for biking the way we'd like it to. How about autonomous shuttles? Is that a potential for any areas in San Mateo County?
It is. It's a little bit down the road, so to speak. I think that there are still some pilots going on in the Bay Area with autonomous vehicles to do that first mile, last mile. Most of them are being done on private roads so far. South San Francisco is actually looking at a pilot with a company that's headquartered here in South City to do some autonomous vehicle trips from the Caltrain station out into the Oyster Point area. It's still a ways down the road, but that will be something to watch. They may be first movers here in San Mateo County.
Thank you. Petra, do you have more, or do we want to try and, if someone wants to raise their hand or unmute themselves and jump in, we can open dialogue.
Somebody asked about an e-bike loaner program. Do we have anything like that locally? So that you can try them out?
Some bike shops do that, like e-bike purveyors do. Carlos, you're going to say something.
No, I was about to refer to you. Yeah, it's not a part of our program right now, but yeah, I understand that some shops have that availability.
Petra, you have more questions, or
just another one about kind of, maybe Adina can elaborate a little bit about where you are with Seamless Bay Area. If anything has moved closer towards coordinating the different transit between the different counties and different kinds of transportation? Is progress being
Yeah, sure. So there are several major initiatives that are happening kind of simultaneously. So, during COVID and partly with a lot of advocacy for a more seamless system, the transit agencies have been working more closely together to provide better connections. The Caltrain BART connection at Millbrae has gotten better. There were some issues in San Francisco where Muni and Samtrans wouldn't pick up each other's riders because of turf issues. And those things have, there's at least temporary solutions to those. But in order to really enable a longer term improvement, there's a Bay Area Transit Recovery Task Force going on that was convened by MTC that's been meeting. It has 30 some members, including John Ford, including the transit agencies, including advocacy groups, labor, equity groups, and they are talking about ways of making organizational improvements so that we will have a long-term, more seamless system. Assemblymember Chu is sitting on that task force looking for ideas to bring legislation in order to be able to move the process along. And the FAIR study that I talked about really may feed into that process, because one of the things that that study is finding is that in order to be able to achieve the deeper level of integration, which would be the most rider-friendly and the most equitable, will also require some seamless changes. So there is progress going on, but there's also some significant inertia and concern about change. So this is something that all of us who have motivations of sustainability and equity, it's going to be really important to speak up and say that we want to overcome the barriers to bring about that change. And so these are all things that we can help with in the coming months.
So we will definitely be sending out this information. In addition, I want to let you know that we will also send out information so that you can get, for instance, on Friends of Caltrain's mailing list, on the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition's mailing list as well, so that when these opportunities for advocacy comes up, you can advocate.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that the issue of funding, because major changes to service, including more frequent service and more affordable fares, are going to take funding to deliver. And the Voices for Public Transportation initiative that I mentioned in the presentation is really working on that for the medium term to raise that funding to be able to do. So that's going to be part of the solution as well.
Thank you, Adina. We have a hand raised from Richard Hedges. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. You piqued my interest with the autonomous shuttles. When I was on the Peninsula, or on the San Mateo Corridor Plan in the late 90s, early 2000s, I advocated then for a shuttle once Bay Meadows was done that would go up Hillsdale to the Alameda, come down Alameda to the 25th Avenue Business District, and then come back into the Caltrain, new Caltrain station. And I believe that an autonomous shuttle would work well, or one of John Ford's would work excellently as well. He's very good at putting together good shuttles. So hopefully we can keep our eye on this. Bay Meadows isn't built all the way out yet, but already has a lot of residents there. And I think a well-advertised shuttle through these neighborhoods, which are reasonably dense. There's a couple of fairly large apartment developments. So I think we could probably bring folks in to the Caltrain station with something like that would make it worthwhile. Thank you.
John, do you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Rich. Always love hearing from Rich Hedges. The Reimagine Samtrans project and the study that they're doing is looking at those kinds of opportunities as well. whether it's our shuttles or it's a Samtrans vehicles, but looking at how they can create better connectivity to the Caltrain station, both with buses and microtransit. And ultimately, we hope that's autonomous vehicles as well.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? It's great information in the chat.
I want to throw one out. Is it, and this was partially from a participant or one who sent an email to me in advance, is that we have huge greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, and obviously transportation is a huge sector. We have representatives from bikes and trains and shuttles and automobiles here. How do we work together? And I know that there are a lot of informal and formal alliances, but really, I mean, this is, you could throw walking in there too. How do we get cross-sector cooperation at a major level to really drive progress? Can we do that? Or is it that's too hard? Are we there? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'll jump in on that. So I've been doing this about 10 years, and I would say, in all honesty, I've never seen more cooperation and collaboration than what we're experiencing over the past year or two. And that's not really the pandemic side. It was really happening before. As we were getting into a point where the congestion was horrible and the alternatives were bad. I'm finding more collaboration with the private sector, working with the public sector and the nonprofits. And I think that it's a recognition that changing people's behavior is really, really hard. A lot of what we've talked about today, getting them to adopt bicycles or electric vehicles, getting people to install things and do things that are different. It's just a lot of heavy lifting that we all need to work together to do, and recognize that small incremental steps along the way are great. And if we can lock in some remote work and help reduce some of that traffic and give us a head start on it, so much the better. So that'd be my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on that question. So one is, as more people are being vaccinated, if we have the prospect of the pandemic lifting and people who've been staying home, doing more traveling and being out and about, that's actually a huge opportunity to bring about change when people are changing their habits. The social science research shows that people are the most likely to adopt a new habit when they're making a life change, like, moving house or, graduating school or something. So we're going to have a very large number of people making lifestyle changes. And I think that's going to be a significant opportunity to band together to help people make more sustainable habits at that time. I think another good model that was inspiring to me was the collaboration around Measure RR to fund Caltrain, that had Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, that had San Francisco Transit Riders, that had YIMBY Action and Housing Leadership Council, a housing group, working together to work on a campaign to bring money into public transportation as a backbone of more sustainable transportation options. So I think there's great opportunities for us in the nonprofit sector to work together, and opportunities to work with the private sector, like later this year and into next year as people adopt whatever habits that they will have in our new normal.
Thanks.
I think we have one more question from Gina, and then we probably have to wrap up. Do you want to go ahead and take yourself off mute?
Carlos had his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. I just wanted to address that question about collaboration, and it's definitely at the forefront of how we operate. For example, the e-bike program, we're working with Silicon Valley Bike Coalition, who's a leader in the community, as well as local bike shops. But we also have some outreach grants. So we give thousands of dollars to nonprofits who work with several different communities in different parts of the county, who are trusted and who can get our messages out in ways that are just beyond our social media or our current channels. And we also work closely with the Office of Sustainability and a lot of the initiatives, great initiatives that they're doing, as well as commute.org. We're working with them. So, whenever we think of a program, we really try to hammer in, who are the champions that are going to be, that can get the word out to the public.
Thanks. Yeah, let me just jump. Is there a kind of rhetorical question? Maybe someone can throw this out later, but a map of who all these organizations are, or maybe even a pie chart or a chart that shows how everyone interconnects. It'd be interesting to see who all these organizations are, and who we don't really have represented is big business on this call. I think, although I think someone from Genentech did sign up, but that's another group that I don't really interact that much with, but a key part of solving these problems. Gina, go ahead.
Thank you. This is a wonderfully collaborative group. My compliments to everybody here. Doug, as to your question, I think the biggest frustration are the operators, Caltrain, BART. They've had decades to coordinate schedules, which really shouldn't take a significant amount of money. San Mateo County has the largest intermodal center west of the Mississippi, and yet BART restricts Caltrain parking. I mean, it's like none of the agencies want to speak about the other agency. I don't know, they don't want to offend each other, but the lack of cooperation for the benefit of commuters is absolutely tragic. And I hope that you all can, I know Adina and John and everybody work to make that better, but really finding that those agencies are the most difficult to coordinate. If anybody can help on that, I'd appreciate it.
Did RR help that at all? Adina, is there coordination? Adina, you work across a number of different modes of transportation. Is there better collaboration coming across?
Well, yes. So having Measure RR will keep Caltrain running, and not having Caltrain running at all would make it impossible to connect to. So that's a good thing. And the Caltrain board's business plan and equity strategy call for better connectivity as a ridership growth strategy and as an equity strategy, which is good. But there is a conceptual barrier that we're seeing, including in the board meetings for the last couple of days, where we're seeing leaders say, well, this is locally raised funding, so how can we possibly use it to spend on things relating to other agencies? So I think that is something that we're going to really need to hear from the community to say, no, this is something that this is a goal that you as the board have approved, and we want to have some of the money to move the passenger from point A to point B. And part of it being our money is solving that interagency goal, not just moving somebody from one Caltrain station to another. So it adds opportunity, but it's going to need some more support to be able to help more people think that way.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I'll wrap up with I do think holistically is walking first, biking, and public transit. If you have to get in an EV, you get in a car, EV. I see a lot of work on all of these areas. We do have a huge bogey to hit in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and how do we all work together? Maybe it's a theme that Thrive is always thinking about. Hopefully, we made a small difference today, that you learned something in your area or the area surrounding you that you didn't know. But please be collaborative. This is an opportunity to see who else is out there and to reach out after this session and do what you can to work together to solve the problems. As that's what we're trying to do with Thrive, is bring together the cross sectors and cross disciplines. Petra, you want to close out and just thank everyone for coming, or anything else that we are coming up? Oh, you're on mute.
I'd like to close out and thank everyone for coming. I know, seriously, a huge thank you to Doug and to all of our speakers. I think this was an excellent cross-section of transportation experts and people who are really concerned both with the equity and the challenge of bringing low carbon transit. So I hope that everybody will benefit from the follow-up email with all of the information that we're going to have and get more involved, because the more involved people are, the more people know that we care and that we can move some of these policies forward. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you on behalf of Thrive. Please go to our website, sign up for our mailing lists or any of our friends' mailing lists. And I hope to see you guys all again soon. Have a good evening, everybody.
And don't forget our upcoming meeting later this month. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.